Everybody, Dr. O again. In this review, I want to cover blood and your blood cells. So just so you know, we'll kind of rush through the white blood cells, the cells involved in immunity, because there's an entire section on immunity later. So we'll barely talk about things like lymphocytes. All right. So blood and blood cells. So just overarching big picture. Remember what blood is. Blood is so powerful because it is what connects your entire body. So I always like to say, like, you don't need a kidney in your foot because your kidneys can do their job where they are, and that clean blood can be sent to your foot and the dirty blood can be sent back, right? You don't need lungs in your legs because the lungs in your chest can handle everything because of blood. So blood is what allows for these divisions of labor. It allows for the complexity of our cells. Another just interesting fact that I have to share, you're made of between 30 and 40 trillion cells depending on size, and they're now pretty sure that's true. I mean, you've heard wildly different numbers over the years. You're made of like 23 to 25 trillion red blood cells. So that's a great trivia question for your friends. You're probably over 80% red blood cell. You're, from a cell number standpoint, you're probably 0.0001% muscle cell. So obviously you have a lot of muscle. Muscle cells are huge. Red blood cells are tiny. So you are 80% red blood cell. That is just crazy to think about. Then on top of that, if you want to make it even cooler, you're half microbial too. So you're made of as many bacterial and fungal cells as you are human cells as well. So, but I digress. All right. Does blood play a role in the generation or regulation of body temperature? So it's actually the regulation. So your muscular system and your metabolism produce heat, and your muscular system is very metabolically active. So we always say that your muscular system plays a major role in the generation of body heat. That's why when you're cold, as I'm recording this today, it's negative 50-some degrees wind chill outside. So that's why I'm recording from home. The college is actually closed. But so if I went outside, my muscles would get tense and I would shiver. That's how we generate body heat. Regulating body heat has to do with your integumentary system, your skin, and your blood. So why? Blood is warmer than the rest of your body. So if you need to warm your core up, blood's going to rush to your core. If you need to cool your core off, this warm blood's going to rush to your skin. Then skin plays a role because it has a massive surface area. And then so the main way we get rid of heat is just radiating it. But if you really need to drop your temperature, you're going to use sweat and the process of sweat evaporation to pull heat out of your body. So it is the regulation of body temperature. I always think of your skin plus your blood as a radiator system, like in your car. All right, what is the fluid portion of blood called, and what percent of it is water? So your blood is basically a 50-50 give or take mixture of plasma, the fluid portion of your blood, and formed elements. And we'll talk about formed elements in just a moment. So plasma is 92% water. It's 92% water, basically 7% plasma proteins, which are proteins primarily made by the liver, that we'll talk about them separately here. Actually, I'm not sure if we will. So yeah, we have the plasma proteins there in just a moment. But the three big ones would be the albumins, the globulins, and fibrinogen. Then the last 1%, give or take, of plasma is going to be other things that are dissolved in the water, like electrolytes and nutrients and waste products, etc. Okay, so the fluid portion of your blood is called plasma. It is 92% water. If you were looking at a tube of centrifuged blood, what would you find at the bottom of the tube and the top? So the top would be the plasma, the fluid portion of your blood. The bottom would be erythrocytes, red blood cells. So kind of 50-50 again. There is a third layer, a real thin layer in the middle, which is, about 0.1% of your blood cells, your formed elements, are going to be, this would be where the white blood cells and platelets are. So it's called the buffy coat, but really the top is plasma and the bottom would be your red blood cells. All right, what are the three formed elements of blood? Why are they called formed elements instead of blood cells? So the three formed elements would be red blood cells, or erythrocytes, white blood cells, also known as leukocytes, and platelets. The reason we don't call them blood cells is because platelets aren't cells, right? Platelets come from a cell, a huge cell, called a megakaryocyte that sloughs off maybe 3,000 or 4,000 platelets. So platelets are a cell fragment, and then you can make a really strong argument that red blood cells aren't cells. They can't divide. They've shot out their nucleus and their DNA, so they don't. To be a cell, you're supposed to have DNA. Well, red blood cells used to have DNA. They got rid of their nucleus. They got rid of their organelles. So they really are just this oxygen transport vehicle. So platelets are not cells, they're cell fragments, and you can make a real strong argument that red blood cells aren't either. So it's semantics, but that's why we use the term formed elements. All right, what is the temperature of blood and what is the pH of blood? So it's kind of some of the general things to know about blood. I always like to say in class, like if it was a baseball card for blood, what would you need to know? Temperature, 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. That's I told you that blood is warmer than the rest of your body, and that's why it plays a role in regulating temperature. Its pH would be between 7.35 and 7.45. That'll be really important when we talk about acid-base disturbances later. So those are the two stats there. A few other ones as far as total amount of blood, which would be the next question, 5 to 6 liters. I'll come right back to that. The average red blood cell lives 120 days. That's probably on here somewhere too. And then viscosity is probably the one that's not on here. Blood is about 5 times more viscous than water. So obviously we want blood to be thicker than water, like the old saying goes, but obviously not too thick. So if you have too many red blood cells, or what's the other thing that thickens up your blood? You can have, like if you have a B12 or folate deficiency, you can start to see some metabolites build up in your blood, the biggest one being homocysteine that kind of sludges up your blood. So your heart has to work hard enough to push blood throughout your body. If your blood is too thick, it's going to be really hard on the heart. So you want to be right about 5 times more viscous or more resistant to flow than water. But that's a pretty minor deal. All right, how much blood does an adult male have, an adult female? I always say 5 to 6 liters of blood. The average female be closer to 5 liters, the average male closer to 6. Size is a big part of that, but testosterone does lead to more cell production than estrogen does, for sure. So it isn't just a size thing, but yeah, a small male is going to have less blood than a large female. I think that's real fair to say. So between 5 and 6 liters of blood. It's important to know what makes blood plasma different than interstitial fluid and why it's different. So that they're actually the two key examples of extracellular fluid. So all the fluid in your body is either intracellular, inside your cells, and that should be about 2/3 of your body's water. And then the other third, give or take, is extracellular fluid. Well, that's going to be any fluid outside your cells. The two key examples of extracellular fluid are plasma, which is the fluid portion of your blood, and interstitial fluid, which is the fluid between your cells. So we'll talk about this more when we get to the blood vessels, but blood plasma, the fluid portion of your blood, is filtered out at your capillaries. About 24 liters of fluid is filtered out of your blood every day. That's going to become interstitial fluid. 20.4 liters of it comes back, is sucked back in, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The remaining 3.6 liters becomes lymph or lymphatic fluid, and then it does work through your body and come back to your heart. But the key difference there is filters only care about size. So interstitial fluid is like blood plasma, but there's nothing large in it. So the plasma proteins will all stay inside your capillaries. So just to quickly answer the question, interstitial fluid is blood plasma without the plasma proteins. They're too large to be filtered out, as are your cells. The red blood cells and everything wouldn't come either. All right, where are most plasma proteins produced? That would be the liver. So one of the key jobs of the liver is to make plasma proteins. I'll tie that into an example here in the next question. There are 3 main classes of plasma proteins: the albumins, globulins, and fibrinogen. What do they each do? Which is the most numerous, and why is that significant? All right, so the most numerous is the first one, the albumins. So albumins, they are a key transporter. They will carry things through your blood. A lot of things just dissolve right into the water of your blood, which is why there's so much water there, and they're just carried that way, just dissolved in your blood. But a lot of things need to be carried. So albumin is a very important transporter, but the number one reason albumin is important is for what's called osmotic pressure. Albumin is a nice-sized protein, so it's too large to be filtered out with that 24 liters of fluid. But albumin is going to suck water back in. So albumin plays a major role in reabsorbing that 20.4 liters of fluid that we reabsorb every day at our capillaries. So why is that important? If you don't have albumin, so if your liver is damaged, like end-stage liver failure, cirrhosis, liver cancer, etc., or you're very, very malnourished and you don't have any protein, so even if your liver wanted to make albumin, you wouldn't have the amino acids, the building blocks. So for one of those two reasons, you don't have albumin, you're not going to reabsorb 20.4 liters a day. So you'll have a condition called ascites. So if you see like a very malnourished child that has a pot belly, that's fluid, that's not fat. It's fluid that's being filtered out of their blood that's not being sucked back in because they don't have enough albumin. Or if you see somebody with end-stage liver failure, cirrhosis, whatever, same thing. My wife's had patients where just liters and liters of fluid have to be removed because their body just isn't making these proteins anymore, especially the albumins. All right, so those are albumins, things transporters and maintaining fluid balance, keeping fluid where it's supposed to be. Okay, so globulins, think your immune system, your antibodies. Your antibodies are called immunoglobulins, so we'll cover them in a later chapter, but like IgG, IgA. The Ig stands for immunoglobulin. So your globulins, they do also transport things, but just think about them from their immune standpoint. And then fibrinogen. Fibrinogen becomes fibrin when your blood clots. So fibrinogen, only think of it in its role in blood clotting. All right, so we said what they each do. We said the most numerous was albumin, and we said that's why it's significant. All right, so like one last example there. So if you see two really malnourished children, one of them is super, super skinny, one of them is super skinny with that pot belly, you know the difference. The kid that's super, super skinny, they still have enough protein, whether they're eating a little bit more of it or whether their body is sadly digesting themselves, like taking protein from their heart and everywhere else. They still have enough protein to make enough albumin to suck water back into their blood vessels. The kid that's skinny and malnourished that also has that fluid accumulating around their abdomen, that ascites, and just so you know, ascites is ASCITES, they don't have enough protein, or their liver is failing. So they're both bad things. All right, how many red blood cells are in a microliter of the average adult? What does it say? How many RBCs are in a microliter of the average adult makes blood? That should not say makes there. I apologize for that. So how many? So in a microliter, so a microliter is a thousandth of a milliliter. So in a single microliter of blood, you're going to see around 4.5 to 6.3 million red blood cells. So I generally say in the ballpark of 5 to 6 million red blood cells per microliter of blood. So if you figure out that there's 1,000 microliters in a milliliter, and the average person has 5 to 6 liters of blood, that's where we get that number that, somewhere between 23 and 25 trillion red blood cells in you. And what's crazy on top of that, each of those red blood cells can carry more than 1 billion molecules of oxygen. Let me just pause here for a second. All right, sorry about that. So your throat just isn't recovered yet. All right, so again, somewhere 4.5 to 6.2, 6.3 million red blood cells per microliter is a good safe number. Okay, next, define hematocrit. So when you look at blood results, you're going to see hematocrit. That is the percent of formed elements that are in your blood. So if the number is too low, you don't have enough blood cells. Chances are you don't have enough red blood cells. If it's too high, you have either too many red blood cells or way too many white blood cells, and that'll throw that number off. That's your hematocrit. Okay, why is the shape of red blood cells so important? So red blood cells they're called a biconcave disc. They're designed to carry the maximum amount of oxygen, so about 1.2 billion oxygens per red blood cell. And their shape is so they can be super small and super flexible. They're about 8 micrometers across. They can fit through capillary beds that are half that size. So the only way the red blood cells can squeeze through all these tiny places is to have the shape they have. It also allows them to stack on top of each other, kind of like dinner plates. You might see the word a roll U. I never use that word, but that's how they can just line right up and travel through these tiny capillaries. So if your red blood cells aren't the right size or shape, they can't squeeze through your smallest blood vessels. That's why if you have some sort of blood cell disorder, it's going to affect things like fingers and toes and your spine, where all your tiniest blood vessels are first. Okay, so what is the protein in a red blood cell that allows it to carry oxygen through your circulation? Another typo there. What mineral is needed? So the protein, 95 to 98 or 99% of red blood cells, depending on who you ask, are the proteins in red blood cell, is hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is specifically designed to carry iron. So iron is what gives hemoglobin its affinity for oxygen. So think of hemoglobin as a frame that holds iron, and that relationship, hemoglobin plus iron, is what allows it to carry oxygen. That's why if you have iron deficiency, you can have all the hemoglobin you want, you can't carry oxygen properly. Okay, what kind of cell is released into general circulation where it matures into a red blood cell? So there's like pro-erythroblasts and all these other terms for the stem cells and cells that become red blood cells. All I really care about are the red blood cells and the reticulocyte. So the answer here is reticulocyte. Reason I care about them, this cell has already had its nucleus ejected. It's basically an immature red blood cell. You'll see reticulocyte counts on blood panels, so that's why I want you to know the term. Reticulocytes are what enter circulation where they finish maturing into a red blood cell. So it's called a reticulocyte. With regard to blood typing, what is an antigen and an antibody? With regard to anything, antigens are cell surface markers. They're what tell other cells what's going on inside of a cell. So whether it's your blood type or whether the cell is yours or not, it's because of all these flags, all these cell surface markers on the surface. That's an antigen. Antibodies are looking for antigens, and they're specifically looking for antigens that shouldn't be there. So antibodies are part of your immune system, and they look for foreign antigens. That's why you don't want to give someone the wrong blood type, because if I have type A blood, which we'll see in a moment, I have anti-B antibodies. So if you accidentally gave me some type B blood, my anti-B antibodies would recognize the B antigen and would attack and destroy that red blood cell. So antigens, think cell surface markers. Antibodies, think a very, very powerful, important part of your immune system. We'll cover antibodies in much more detail in a few chapters. Okay, your patient has type A blood. What kind of surface antigens do they have? What kind of antibodies would be in their plasma? So if you have type A blood, you have the A antigen on your red blood cell surface. It's called the ABO system. You're either going to have A antigens and be type A. You're going to have AB and be type AB. You're going to have just B and be type B. Or you're going to have none and be type O. There isn't an O antigen. That's very important. O is the absence of A and B. Okay? All right, and then we'll get into positives and negatives in a moment. So what kind of antigens would that person have? Type A. What kind of antibodies? Anti-B. Now, if they were A negative blood, meaning they don't have the RH antigen, or it used to be called D, this would mean that they may have anti-RH antibodies. We'll come back to that in just a moment. All right, what blood type is the universal donor and what's the universal recipient? So the universal donor is O negative. That means they don't have A, they don't have B, and they don't have RH antigens. So their blood cells are really clean. No matter who you give them to, that person you're giving the blood to won't have antibodies against those red blood cells. So the universal donor is O negative. Universal recipient, A, B positive. Because they have all three, A, B, and RH antigens, they can't have antibodies in their blood looking for them. Okay? Sorry. What's the most common blood type in America? This would be O positive. So O is the most common from the ABO system. And around, depending genetically on where your genes are from, about 85%, give or take, of people have positive blood types. So O positive is the most common. What role does the RH factor play? Why does it only matter during a woman's second pregnancy? So again, that's an example we'll get to. But the RH antigen is different than the other one because with your ABO system, it appears the antibodies are pre-programmed or else you get them really, really early. So if you have type A blood, you have anti-B antibodies. If you have negative blood type, meaning you don't have this RH antigen, you might have anti-RH antibodies. It's only if you've been exposed to them. So the example I'm talking about here is a condition that used to be called erythroblastosis fetalis, but we just call it hemolytic disease of the newborn. This would be a mom with a negative blood type, baby with a positive blood type. So during the first pregnancy, nothing's wrong because mom hasn't been exposed to this RH antigen yet. But during delivery, when the placenta tears and blood mixes, now mom's immune system has seen a positive blood type, an RH positive blood type, which means mom will now develop anti-RH antibodies, which then means that from the second pregnancy and all other pregnancies, if the baby has a positive blood type, mom's immune system will attack and destroy it. So that's why it would be an issue. So what we now have, since I believe 1956, we have RhoGAM. RhoGAM is a desensitization shot that keeps mom's immune system from developing that immunity, that reaction. All right, a very important area here. Know the key facts about each of the 5 types of white blood cells. We have neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, monocytes, and macrophages. So, which becomes a tissue macrophage? That's going to be your monocytes. So monocytes really don't do anything. They travel, and when they get where they're needed, sprained ankle, infection, whatever, they will turn into tissue macrophages. And like the name implies, macrophages are really big eaters. They'll start to engulf things. A lot of these cells are macrophages, or at least phagocytes. Let's see, which is elevated in bacterial infections? That'd be your neutrophils. Neutrophils are really good phagocytes. They can engulf potentially thousands of bacteria, and then when they'll eat so many, they explode. Pus is basically like dead neutrophils and the dead bacteria it took with them. So kind of cool if you're into pus. All right, which release histamine? That's going to be your basophils. There is another cell type called the mast cell that releases histamine, but histamine is very inflammatory. That's why if you have allergies, when you're inflamed, you take antihistamines. So the other thing, basophils will also release heparin, which is a blood thinner, so it increases the movement of cells to an area when you need them. All right. which is elevated in viral infections? That would be your lymphocytes. So we'll talk about T cells and B cells and all manner of other things, natural killer cells, in just a few chapters. Which is elevated in allergic reactions and parasitic infections? That would be your eosinophils. So they actually fight parasites because they can be phagocytes, but if you're too large for them to eat, they will actually spray poison on you. Think about things like hydrogen peroxide and free radicals. Okay. Last one here. Which usually shows up first? Probably because it's by far the most numerous. So your neutrophils are about 70% of your white blood cells will be neutrophils, and they generally are the first to be elevated. Okay. Running out of coffee. Which of the white blood cells or leukocytes are classified as granulocytes? That's going to be, I think I put them in the right order for you. The neutrophils, the eosinophils, and the basophils, they're called granulocytes. Not a big deal. Just means when you stain them or look at them under the microscope, you're going to see the granules. You're going to see these little vesicles inside of them. So neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Okay. What type of cells are involved in cell-mediated immunity, and what types are involved in humoral immunity? So, cell-mediated means direct cell-to-cell combat, if you want to think of it that way from an immune standpoint. Those are your T cells. I call them the knights. They got the swords. They chop and attack and destroy cells directly. Humoral immunity, which you might also see called antibody-mediated immunity. Humoral means body fluids. So, they're not going to attack cells directly. They're going to put things in body fluids that will do the attacking for them, and that'll be your antibodies. So I think of your B cells, which are the ones that end up making antibodies. They're your archers. So they stand back and they fire off antibodies rather than directly attacking cells. So cell-mediated, think T cells. Humoral or antibody-mediated immunity, think B cells. All right, all blood cells come from myeloid stem cells, except for which type and what kind of stem cell do they come from. So this is called a lymphoid stem cell. So remember that all blood cells, the cell that becomes that ends up becoming platelets, your red blood cells, and all other white blood cells come from myeloid stem cells, except for your lymphocytes. So like lymphocytes come from lymphoid stem cells. All right, let's see. What kind of cells does a B cell become before it can make antibodies? So I just said B cells lead to antibodies. Well, they don't directly. B cells become a plasma cell, and that's the cell that makes antibodies. Okay? Platelets are fragments of a much larger cell. What's it called? It's actually called a megakaryocyte. So I mentioned it earlier. It's a huge cell that sloughs off maybe 3,000 or 4,000. I generally say 3,000 platelets. So platelets are a fragment of a cell called a megakaryocyte. How long does the average platelet live? I would say 9 days. Some would say 8, but 8 to 9 days. Contrast that to red blood cells that can live 120 days. Okay, blood clotting is a complex, positive, feedback-driven process, but the end result is the conversion of water-soluble fibrinogen into what? Water-insoluble, which is why it clots, fibrin. So the blood clotting cascade, we covered in other places, but it's very complex. It needs vitamin K and calcium, all sorts of cool things, and the clotting factors from the liver. But it's in the end result is turning fibrinogen into fibrin, and that's how this mesh-like clot will form. All right, 2 more. What is fibrinolysis? So lysis means to split or tear apart. So this would be when you break up a clot. So you want a scab, you want a clot, for when it's needed, but you need to be able to break them up when they're no longer needed. That's called fibrinolysis. Last point, a loss of blood volume would stimulate which kidney hormone to increase red blood cell production? So if your kidneys sense that drop in blood pressure, they're assuming there's a loss of blood. So the hormone I'm talking about here is erythropoietin, which is going to tell your bone marrow to make more red blood cells. Also, and something that will be covered again later, it's going to release a chemical called renin, which will lead to this renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So we will cover that in detail later, but it's going to make you thirsty. It's going to make you produce less urine. It's going to hold on to water. So when you see a drop in blood pressure, your body says, hold on to water to increase our blood volume. And this hormone here, EPO, or erythropoietin, make more red blood cells to build up our blood volume. Your body, especially your kidneys, really want to make sure that you have plenty of blood pressure because your kidneys function based on pressure. If there's no pressure pushing blood through your kidneys, they can't work. They turn off. Okay, I truly hope Hope this helps you guys. I want you to succeed. I hope you know that. So have a wonderful day. Be blessed.